Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here. And guess what? It's another fans only episode where I answer your emails or direct messages about the Minnesota Vikings. So if you don't have a chance to join any of our live streams to get your question in, feel free to shoot it over to me at purpleinsider.com or on Twitter at Matthew Coller. Always happy to hear from any Vikings fan leading up to the most important draft they've had in a very long time. So I'm excited to dive in to more questions. So let's get right to it and start out with Brandon, who writes to ask, with more reports coming out, seemingly like teams are almost begging for someone to bump up the price and trade with them, maybe the price actually won't be that bad. I appreciate your optimism, but I'm guessing that the price is probably going to be pretty high. And, the thing is, we can use a lot of draft charts. We can use the Jimmy Johnson draft chart you guys always hear about at draft time, or there's been other more analytical charts that have popped up through the years. And we could say, oh, well, if they only trade this and that, then they've got a good chance to get the other team to give them the number 3 overall pick or number 4 overall pick. But in this draft, there's just another part of it that makes this a lot harder, which is, number one, the team at 3 also has a good case for drafting a quarterback, which means the price better absolutely blow them away in order for them to sacrifice that chance to take Jaden Daniels or to take Drake May. And then there's the other part of it. If you're Arizona, there is a quote generational wide receiver prospect. So again, if you want them to sacrifice taking that caliber of prospect at number 4, then you better wow the Arizona Cardinals. And I think that every general manager is right to say, hey, like, we're open for business. Come make a call and we'll see, because all of them know that historically there have been a few of these trades, and Herschel Walker is involved in this, but also, heck, the Trey Lance trade up seems pretty nuts at this point. And there have been others like Mike Ditka giving away his whole draft for Ricky Williams. Like, this has happened in the past. So you always have to say, hey, we're open for business. Feel free to give us a call and we'll talk potential trade. But in this instance, with multiple teams talking about trading up and plenty of reason for the teams at the top to stay where they are, I just think that the price is going to be extremely high. The thing that the Vikings have going for them, though, with the price being very high, is that they can afford it. Being able to get the number 23 pick without giving up a whole heck of a lot for the future, that's really helpful to the Vikings case, because then they can top anything else that other teams can put together. So if you're the Broncos and you say, all right, 3 firsts, well, you got to wait for those 3 firsts. And you know what front offices don't love to do is wait, because that means that's drafting a player, that's developing them, that's not getting them in their prime till usually year 2, year 3. So if you can get it right away, then that's just a lot more helpful. And the Vikings giving away those 2 picks to potentially move up also doesn't really crush them, because they have so many of the star talents that you'd be looking for on offense already in place. The best argument for the Patriots to move down is that they lack those things. KJ Osborne and Kendrick Bourne are their best wide receivers. That's not like having Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. So the Vikings are able to do this and not destroy their future because they have pieces in place. But if they make a trade, if they do pull it off, it's probably going to be at an extreme cost that will make people clutch pearls. Oh no, the Vikings gave up how much for JJ McCarthy? That's too much. And then if he becomes great, no one will ever mention it again. But I think that if I was guessing right now, I would probably say that we'll be more likely surprised that the price is so high rather than it is so low. But you never know. This one comes from Jens, or maybe Jens, depending on where you're coming from. Everybody assumes that the Vikings want to move up to get one of the top 4 quarterbacks, but what if they came away from the evaluation loving Penix or Nix? Well, this is always a difficult thing, because when we see so many mock drafts and so many big boards that all have the same listing, the same order, sometimes it comes out exactly like that, and sometimes it completely doesn't, right? I mean, if you go back in history and even look at, places like Mock Draft Database or grinding the mocks that track what draft analysts thought of these players, well, sometimes you'll see that the order that they have them in is dead on. And think about the 2020 draft where the order was pretty well set. I mean, I think we understood that Burrow was going to go at the top, Tua, Herbert, Jordan Love was more of a late first round pick. And when it all kind of came to fruition, it wasn't that shocking. But there have been other times in recent history where it has been totally shocking that, say, in 2022, that there was only one first round draft pick in Kenny Pickett. And then, all the other quarterbacks that have been mocked in the first round did not turn out to be actual first round picks. So it's very hit or miss how accurate the outside analysts are. And what I'm trying to get to is that JJ McCarthy may very well be a top 4 draft pick. And in the past, there have been a lot of hits from mock analysts and draft reporters. But if he's not, I wouldn't be completely blown away. Or if the amount of interest in him is not as high as you think, and maybe he is available at number 11, or maybe they do like Penix or Nix more than they would be willing to give up a ton to go up and get JJ McCarthy. Personally, for this particular draft, I don't think we're going to be shocked. That's my feeling right now in early April. Is I think that the outside world might have this one right about the order of these quarterbacks. But if there is somebody that's going to end up being overrated, it is McCarthy, because his mock draft place at the end of the season was not where it is now. And it's really only been the buzz that has pushed him up everybody's boards. But how did the NFL actually feel about him at the end of the season and through this process is less clear. But I mean, the other guys, it would be very surprising if they fell. I don't know better than anybody else, but Drake May with his raw talent, Jaden Daniels with his speed and his floor because he's a great runner. It's just harder to see those guys being the one who drops. But again, you never really can figure that out. Even the fact that Justin Fields was drafted where he was taken, he was not expected to fall even into the middle of the first round. So it can be very unpredictable. And the Vikings are not letting this information out. So if they did trade to 23 to say, give them an option to move up, their order of favorite things to do might be different than ours, because our order of favorite Viking things to do is trade up to get Drake May is number 1. And then trade up less to get McCarthy has been number 2 on my list. But if they told me, hey, we actually think Penix and McCarthy are equal, and we think we can wait till 11 and then draft another player at 23, that's a good outcome for them. It is. And that's part of how important this month is, where O'Connell is meeting with these players, because he's got to decide how much it would be worth to give up to go get JJ McCarthy, or if it is preferable based on what he sees inside of those rooms to get Michael Penix. That's going to be the determining factor. If you just watch those two guys play football this last year, Penix would have been your easy pick, but there's a lot more to it than that. There's projectable skills, there's development, there's the processing and how Kevin O'Connell vibes with each guy that all are going to matter. But would I be tremendously shocked if the Vikings actually ended up liking Penix more than McCarthy? No, I wouldn't. Would I be completely shocked if Penix is a 3rd round pick? No, I wouldn't. That is how wide the range of opinions on Michael Penix is. I have seen people who have him as QB6. They're not even considering him. I've seen people who are credible draft analysts who put in the work, who have him as QB2 or QB3. It's really hard to figure out by just studying what the outside world says. So yes, you're right that we're assuming that it's a top 4, but it might be that they only want to trade up for Drake May or Jaden Daniels, and then would prefer to draft at 11 and take Penix or Nix, or even roll the dice. There's so many ways to go about this. I just imagine Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's office having all the newspaper clippings and the yarn connecting them and all the, like that, that Always Sunny in Philadelphia thing with just, or A Beautiful Mind is basically what it's going to look like inside of his office, because there's so many ways this can go. But what you're asking is, we are making a lot of assumptions, as we always have to do during draft season that may turn out to surprise us. This comes from Ezekiel. Draft Fuaga, who's a lineman, at 11, or Latham to play guard, and then Penix at 23. So the thing about the guard people, there's always the guard people, and a lot of times the guard people have been right. This particular instance, I have trouble getting fully on board with the guard people. Taking a guard at 11 and just rolling the dice on quarterback would be pretty wacky, I think, for the Vikings. But the guard position in particular, this last offseason changed the game a little bit as far as our positional value and as far as the surplus value. So I talk about this sometimes, where what you're getting on a rookie contract versus what you have to pay for a player in free agency, and that gap. So with a quarterback, you pay $8 million for your first round quarterback and 45 for Kirk. That's surplus value, the difference in between those. And when you look at a defensive end, it's massive. When you look at a wide receiver, it's massive. This was like Jordan Addison. To get a wide receiver 2 in free agency would be very expensive. You have to pay wide receiver 1 prices a lot of times for wide receiver 2s. So to have a guy in a rookie contract like Jordan Addison is really valuable for the Vikings. And guard has always been one where you've said, okay, well, those guys don't get that much money until they do. Now, all of a sudden they do. And when you're talking about beefing up in front of a rookie quarterback or quarterback on a rookie contract, the best you can do is good. I mean, right? So getting, randoms to try at left guard is not really favorable. So the best you could do is to draft somebody super high, because you couldn't go out and spend all the money right now on the guard position, and you would have been overspending for half of those guys like crazy. So what I'm saying is that even though guard guy, I'm less on board with this year, because defensive tackle is important to me. The cornerback is important to me. These are positions that I think Brian Flores could really use to have a top 5 defense, not just serviceable or good defense. But you're not as nuts as you might have been in the past, Ezekiel, because of the way this last free agency played out. I would just switch it, though. I would not have Penix, if that's who they were going to take. I would not have him at 23. I would have him at 11 and guard at 23, rather than take the chance that somebody else plucks that quarterback off the board, unless they are sure. But you're never really sure when you go into that draft night. So what I'm saying is you're not a guard obsessive, as I think we became over the Tom Compton and Dakota Dozier years. And it's not that wild of an opinion. I just feel like corner and defensive tackle are really important to completing Brian Flores' defense if they're going to stay at 11 and 23. Next question comes from Matt. Matt's get preferential treatment, of course, on this show. Says, assuming Kwesi Adofo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell trade up to take a quarterback, if Penix starts falling down the board and is there in the 4th round, how badly would fans scream draft malpractice if they took him too? The hard part about doing this is I always try to separate the philosophical from the realistic, right? Philosophically speaking, knowing how it went in Washington and knowing how it went in San Francisco, that sometimes the first rounder doesn't work out and it's the other guy that you picked that ends up being the best quarterback, it makes a lot of sense, philosophically speaking. In practice, I think it's harder to do, because right away, you kind of create an awkward situation. And Kirk Cousins has talked about this a little bit throughout his career, about how uncomfortable it was, about how it wasn't the best place to be drafted. And, ultimately it ends up working out for Cousins to get the job. But the owner and his minions didn't like Kirk Cousins because they wanted RG3 to work out. And yet the Shanahans, the coach, the head coach, and Kyle Shanahan and that crew with Sean McVay, they liked Kirk Cousins better because he operated their offense. And of course, RG3 wasn't the same after that first year, but they appreciated that Kirk Cousins was accurate and diligent and understood the ins and outs of their offense. And so there ended up being this conflict there. in this instance, if you're talking about trading up and putting all the eggs in a basket, you really can't bring in someone else to hedge, because then it's going to be, well, what if that guy does look better in training camp? And I know the goal is to find the best possible quarterback, but if you take Penix and trade up for May, it's altogether possible that Penix is farther along than May to start. So do you want Penix to win that job out of camp? I mean, this is, yeah, I just think, and also too, the odds of a fourth round pick working out. And again, I know there's these two examples, and even with Seattle, they got trashed for taking Russell Wilson when they had Matt Flynn. The odds of anything past the third round working out at quarterback are very, very low. So if he were to get there, that means those medicals are a disaster, or that means that there's something very wrong with his game or his character that we don't know about. I don't see that happening with Penix, but there's probably a reason for someone that talented and successful. The reason Kirk was a fourth round pick was because he just didn't have a physical tool that anyone could really buy into. And Russell Wilson, because he was short. And those are the only real reasons. Penix, because he's got size, velocity on the football, all those things, and even more athleticism than we expected. If he were to drop that far, that means that everybody knows there's something going on there, because even Hendon Hooker ended up as a third round pick. But I like it from if I was building the team on a computer, boop, I'll take that other quarterback. Building a team in practice, actually putting it out on the field, much, much harder to do, I think. But a good idea, just one that I think would be very hard to implement. This question comes from RO. Is it possible for you to think back to the end of the college season and re-rank the top quarterback prospects based on their game tape instead of the measuring tape? Sure. I mean, this one's not that hard. And this is not from my guess at how the NFL feels about these players, because we just don't really know. And we only hear from this scout or this position coach and that position coach that talks to this reporter. And then we've got telephone game. And then all of a sudden, JJ McCarthy's being taken number 2 and is like, what? But if we go back to the end of the college season, in my opinion, I thought that Caleb Williams was still the best prospect, but I had some questions. And I was in kind of a little bit of a mode of maybe Drake May will get the number 1 spot. And as the offseason has gone on, it's become very clear that that was never going to happen, that Caleb Williams was always the guy. So, okay. Now with Drake May, that's an interesting one, because that sort of smacks of boredom, where Drake May was locked in at number 2. It was Williams, May, whole season. And then May had a pretty tough end of his season that I think convinced some people, hey, maybe he won't go number 2 overall, and he might not still. But go back to 2022 and some of his best games in 2023, and you see the high end type of skill and natural ability to throw the football, off platform playmaking that makes Drake May a top prospect. So I watched, and I'm doing a podcast on this as well that you should go back and look for. But I watched, Drake May back against Duke the other day and was like, yeah, that to me is a top quarterback prospect. And there's really no reason that he should be anywhere but number 2. And Jaden Daniels, through halfway through the season, it was not clear that he was going to be what he was. And then he had that game against Florida, the explosive running ability, and he ends up getting hyped up as potentially number 2. I think at the end of the season, he probably would have been number 3, and I would have left it that way. The only difference for me would have been I would have had Michael Penix ahead of JJ McCarthy, and Bo Nix probably also ahead of McCarthy. And this is with watching less of Nix under a microscope. But even still, there are just times where you watch Bo Nix and he plays so on time, where it's drop back, make his read, get the ball out, not screen passes. I'm talking about throwing all over the field, that I just really liked. And it's hard to pry me away. And I know I might be wrong for this. It's hard to pry me away from those stats, right? That the stats of Bo Nix that he put up this year, he just played as well as you possibly could have played with a good team and with a good offense. And he didn't turn the ball over and he didn't take sacks. And it was like, man, that looks good to me. I thought he was taller, so that kind of knocked it down a little bit for me. And the more I watched, the more I saw some stuff where I went, I don't know if that is going to translate as well. And the more you learn about McCarthy, the more you hear from him, the more, when you see that 3-cone and the quickness, because it's hard to know, okay, he's running away from college people. Can he scoot away from an NFL guy? All right, he's got that 3-cone number. He probably can, right? But I would have had McCarthy behind the other two at that point. And since then, he has, on everyone's mock draft board, been moved up to QB4 pretty unequivocally at this point. But just how I would have had it, I would have had McCarthy behind Penix and Nix. And, maybe I was completely wrong for that, but it seemed like that wasn't even a crazy take versus what the mock drafters had at that point. And it's only really changed since then. So is that driven by the combine and stuff we learn about the guy? Is it driven by more football people talking to reporters and insiders getting more knowledge since the end of the season? Or is it completely fake news and we're going to end up with Michael Penix as QB4? Like, I don't know. That was my feeling coming out of the college season. And, you do more studying and more reading and everything else about the prospects since then. I think McCarthy is probably clearly a better prospect than Nix, but with Penix, that might depend on a matter of preference for a team. But it is an interesting mind experiment. And I think what a lot of Vikings fans are concerned about, reasonably so, is, are you kind of taking the bait here? Are you taking a guy that was never really that good in college that everyone's been talked into? And I don't know the answer, but I can see from McCarthy, I can see the way that he is built and the skills that he has, the raw skills he has, could be developed into a very, very good NFL quarterback. So I don't want to be down on the idea just because my impression at the end of the season was something else. So that's kind of important. But is it a legitimate worry? Yeah, it might be. It's just hard to say based on, because we only have history to draw on, but McCarthy he can only be himself, right? So what happened to somebody else, Blake Bortles, has nothing to do with JJ McCarthy. And that's what makes it hard to say, well, X proves Y, when they're just so different of things. Adam asks, do you think part of what's taking so long is that they are simply okay with a few guys and maybe don't have a huge gap between them, so it gives them more options? Talking about the trade up, I think that there's probably like a ranking of top potential reasons why this is what it is so far, and they haven't made this move. And I think the number one reason is likely that the Patriots and the Cardinals, they don't have to do this right now. They just don't. Like, they've got the rest of the month to figure it out, and they've got draft night, and they understand that deadlines make deals, and there's more pressure on the Minnesota Vikings to make that move and give them everything the closer we get to the actual draft. There is not that pressure as of right now, not until we get there. And so that's number one reason why I think it's taking so long. Number two might be that the Patriots and Cardinals are full of it and they don't want to trade, and they never did want to trade, and they just want to take their guys. But in public, you look foolish if you don't say, oh yeah, we listen to offers. If you're number 4 and you say we wouldn't dare listen to offers, then people can go back and second guess you and say, hey, wait a minute, you drafted this guy, but you could have had these guys. It just makes it maybe sound better to say we're open for business, and they never know when they're going to get a crazy, insane trade offer. That could be one of the reasons. It could also be that the Vikings are going through their process. They're meeting with all these guys, and they don't want to make this trade all the way up until they've had their sit downs and their meetings with everybody. And they are 100% sure, like, hey, this is our guy. We sat down with him. We're all in on Drake May. We're all in on JJ McCarthy. So pull that lever. Cha-ching. There's the trade. That's our guy. Everybody cheer in the draft room. We're good to go. But you can't do that until you've met with them, because you've got to be everybody all in with complete diligence. And as much as I've talked about how you could pick names out of a hat with quarterbacks, try going to your owner and saying, yeah, you know what? We made that trade and then we met with the guy. And the owner's going to go, what? Huh? Wait, why? You weren't sure? And you just made the trade anyway? So you have to do everything you can to be prepared for that. And then they can decide, is it right to give up 3 firsts, for example? So we still continue to wait and see and find out what the Vikings will do with their draft capital. But you guys have lots of great ideas about this, and I love hearing them. So purpleinsider.com, that's where you can hit me up, send me an email, your ideas, your draft questions, also anything else as well, football related. We've had some fun questions here running through these fans only emails as well. Also hit me up on Twitter at Matthew Coller, and we'll catch you next time here on Purple Insider Football.